and I think the value of the discussions that we had at those meetings and the level of interaction that we had between countries in particular, and then between countries and other stakeholders, was largely thanks to the extensive preparation that was done, and many of you on the call today are a part of that. So I really do want to thank you for it. And simply getting the ministers to come to the meetings as well, and making sure that countries were represented and represented at the highest level possible, again, I think is thanks to a lot of the work that was done in country in the lead up to the meetings. So as you're aware, when we met in Washington, D.C. for the SWA high-level meetings, they comprised two meetings. One was the sector ministers meeting. That was a 1.5-day meeting convened by UNICEF, hosted by PAHO. The second was a finance ministers meeting convened by the World Bank and held at the World Bank. That was a 2-hour meeting. Across those two meetings, we had 59 countries represented. We had 60 participants at ministerial level, so ministerial or vice ministerial level, and then senior representatives from other stakeholders in SWA, including 5 bilateral donors. So that's an overview of the meetings. That photo you see there is a sort of overview of the finance ministers meeting, and you see from that photo just some of the level of engagement that we had, and some familiar faces there as well to many of you on the call, I think. So on the next slide, we just have a quick summary of the preparatory process. I won't read through each of those stats in detail, but just to say it was an extensive process. It ran from September last year through to April. As much as possible, we encouraged multi-stakeholder dialogue in countries to prepare the ministers. We, from the secretariat point of view, as a coordinating role, ran a number of seminars on 5 different topics and had a high level of engagement in that. We also coordinated bilateral calls with various countries. And, again, as you see from that, there was a high level of engagement amongst partners in that preparatory process, which included discussions about the implications of the SDGs, what they meant in terms of financing. The building blocks and the collaborative behaviours. So an extensive preparatory process in the lead up to the meeting. And again, you've heard me say it before, I'll say it again and again. It's not just about what happens in Washington on those 2 days. It's to do with what happens in the preparation, and it's to do with what happens now in terms of follow-up. During the meetings, again, I think you're aware of the agenda and the various issues that were discussed. And in particular, on the next slide, I'd like to draw your attention to the topics of the ministerial dialogues that formed a core part of the day and a half's worth of discussions at the sector ministers meeting. And they were focused on 3 key issues. One was about achieving safely managed sanitation services while eliminating inequalities. The second one looked at threats to achievement of the SDGs, including climate change and disasters. So in that, we were grappling with the humanitarian development continuum. And the third issue focused very much on the financing questions. And, overall, the ministers spent and the other participants spent around 6 hours, so a good part of the meeting in those ministerial dialogues. So what's come out of the meeting? If you take a look at the next slide, we've got a quick overview of what was encapsulated, I think I wanted to say, excuse me, in the chair's call to action, which was issued soon after the meetings were held. And essentially there were activities for countries to lead on, and then a call to action for other partners to support government-led national programs. So the first call to action was to strengthen the WASH sector by putting in place the fundamental building blocks. In other words, to have comprehensive national plans that addressed each of the SWA building blocks. There was then a complementary call to ensure that we had realistic sector financing strategies to achieve those plans. I'm I'm so sorry. Please excuse my voice. The third area was around and focused very much on the discussions that we had at the finance ministers meeting around addressing inefficiencies in the current systems and institutions of service delivery. So in other words, to get our own house in order to ensure that we were using the money that we had as effectively as possible. And then lastly, to seek ways to attract more commercial finance, both from domestic and international sources. So even if we maximize the use of available funds, how do we bring more money into the sector and into these activities? So as I said, ongoing country and partner level actions, and an acknowledgement and a call for all partners to use the SWA platform as an opportunity for mutual accountability, to come back and share progress, and to make sure that we're holding ourselves to account for these actions that we agreed to. So let me, again, to give you a bit of a flavour of the meetings, if I could ask Sitali if you could click through the next. I've just got a few slides to show you with some of the personalities and some of the things that were mentioned. Here on this first one, you see the World Bank President, Jim Kim, sitting next to the SWA Chair, Kevin Rudd, focusing on both the moral imperative and the economic importance of addressing water and sanitation. In the next slide, you'll see the minister from Swaziland, who spoke passionately at the sector ministers meeting about what was happening in Swaziland, and who was also the voice of the sector ministers at the finance ministers meeting. She gave a readout at the beginning of the finance ministers meeting on what had been discussed in the day and a half that had gone before. She put to the finance ministers what the sector ministers were committed, the actions that they were committed to doing, and she called on the finance ministers to partner with their sector ministers to achieve water and sanitation and hygiene for all. In the next slide, here's just a shot of Kevin Rudd focusing on the need for us to do things differently if we're to achieve the SDGs. We also had, as you'll see in the next slide, Matt Damon there, speaking as a civil society representative, as the co-founder of water.org, calling on or challenging the ministers to tackle this problem and sharing a bit of his experience from water.org. In the next slide, you see Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General. She was a highly articulate spokesperson on this issue. I think she, it's quite, we're hopeful and we feel confident that in this new Deputy Secretary General, we have a champion for WASH issues and particularly sanitation and hygiene issues in the way that we did with Jan Eliasson, the previous DSG. It was great to see her at this meeting, and she said she looked forward to being at the next one. And then in the last slides the last picture slide that I'm going to show you before I hand back to Sitali, Sheila Patel, probably known to many of you from Slum Dwellers International. She spoke on behalf of the civil society constituency. She was, again, highly articulate, but also speaking and from a very practical point of view, and really offering again the partnership of civil society with government to address the issues that we have before us. So we've got those pictures and some of the quotes and information from the meetings available on our website. We've got the presentations uploaded from many of the speakers at both of the meetings. So I would invite you to take a look at that if you want more detail. But that's a quick overview, and at that point I'll hand back to Sitali to talk to you more about what we do in the follow-up, and also to see whether or not any of you have any questions at this point. So Sitali, back to you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you for giving us that flavor of the meetings. And it's good to also sort of look at the objectives and the actual content of these conversations. So grateful for that. At this point, we just want to pause and see if there are any questions of clarifications. If you wanted to hear more about any of the two meetings, I think that this would be a good opportunity to get those clarifications and questions. I mean, we have Amanda. We also have colleagues on the call who attended the meeting, so it would be useful. It would be good to also hear from the group some of those perspectives from their own experiences. So if there's a question, please do feel free to take up the floor to ask Amanda or to ask some of the other colleagues who were at the meeting, and then Amanda will come back to that. Thank you. You can also type in the chat, but at the moment the floor is open in case there's somebody who would like to ask a question. Okay, I think it looks like we do not have a question, so that must have been very clear, and thank you, Amanda. I think the only question we had was whether that photo was of Jason Bourne, and I think that was Matt Damon. So that's interesting. So to get into the next part of this webinar, we going to look at the suggestions that we're putting forward from the Secretariat in terms of how the follow-up of this meeting could look like. These suggestions are meant to contribute to already ongoing multi-stakeholder discussions at country level, and we hope that these can also be inclusive of the mutual accountability processes going forward. And like I said, this is building on the already ongoing conversations with the keen interest of using the high-level meetings as a moment to create the momentum that can help to catalyze action. We're hoping that both at country level, these activities could be obviously led by government, and as well as bring in the support from different partners so that there's a joint efforts to actually take these conversations forward. And in terms of the specific suggestions, or rather before I tackle those suggestions, our main thinking in terms of objectives of putting forward these suggestions are that these conversations should support the strengthening of government-led multi-stakeholder engagement, which is aimed at catalyzing the planning, the financing and systematic review of the SDGs. We're also hoping that these post-HLM follow-up activities could systematically create a link between the Ministry of Finance as well as the sector ministers on issues that relate to national planning as well as financing for the sanitation and water sustainable development goals. And we hope that this phase will also deepen analysis on the building blocks and the collaborative behaviors, and more importantly, to identify priority actions that are required to improve sector performance. And finally, we hope that this process can help to identify key areas of learning from countries and partners, and we are also looking into sharing those lessons across the partnership so that we can continue this way of using the SWA platform as an avenue for creating further learning on various issues that challenge different countries on the approaches that they're taking on the SDGs. There are three main blocks of suggestions in terms of the follow-up activities. The first block is to we're suggesting activities that focus on strengthening the sector dialogue on the SDGs. And the second block of activities is focusing on the Inter-Ministerial Dialogues. And then lastly, focusing on ongoing advocacy efforts. So to go into slight detail for each of these, on sector dialogue for the SDGs, we would like this to build on the activities prior to the high-level meetings. You will recall that prior to the high-level meetings, the focus was threefold. One, looking at what the baseline for the SDG is in each country. So country partners and governments looked at their SDG preliminary estimates for the baseline, and a good number of the countries were able to indicate what their baseline is for rural or urban water or sanitation, and they were able to use that baseline to have discussions on the sector vision, on how ambitious the country wanted to be, as to whether they were going for basic services or safely managed services, or some aspects of basic and safely managed in different circumstances. Now, in a number of countries, that conversation was not concluded, and so we're hoping that going forward, this could be used as the opportunity to finalize that conversation on the baseline for the SDGs as well as the vision for the SDGs. A number of countries indicated that they were integrating these aspects in their own national plans or sector plans, and indeed others were also planning to actually do new plans that are very much aligned with the SDGs. So the first block area in terms of the sector dialogue on the SDGs is really a suggestion that this discussion on the baseline should not end with the HLM itself, but that it should continue where that conversation had not finalized, perhaps with even a horizon in terms of how soon a country might want to do that given its own context. The second block area of sector dialogue is around the building blocks. Basically, the suggestion that countries could continue to identify the bottlenecks on the building blocks of strategy and planning, on institutions, roles and responsibilities of various institutions, on capacity development, on financing, and on having a planning and monitoring review the process for the SDGs. Now, these building blocks, I mean, this is not a conversation that is new, but we think that what is really critical at this moment is testing the rigor of these building blocks vis-a-vis the vision that the country has set for the SDGs. Are indeed these building blocks, the strategy, the policies and plans, are they indeed best suited to catalyze the action that countries are hoping to see? And if not, then what are the bottlenecks that have to be removed, or rather what are the challenges to be removed to ensure that these bottlenecks indeed fit for purpose? The second aspect of this sector readiness is on the collaborative behaviors, where the encouragement is that to continue the discussion on the four collaborative behaviors of enhancing government leadership, of developing and strengthening country systems, of the building block of also having a good cycle of review processes to get information and evidence and make sure that that information and evidence contributes to a robust review cycle for the SDGs. And the last one being that there's a build that sustainable financing strategies are built and put in place, of course looking at the 3 T's of the tariffs, taxes and transfers. So we think that this second area of analysis around the sector readiness is indeed key, and countries can continue with that conversation. And perhaps this is an area where prior to the HLM there were mixed levels of progress. Other countries had input into that process because they had received their profile on the collaborative behaviors, but not all countries had received that, and some countries received those documents very late, and so they did not have the chance to actually have a dialogue on that and identify some intermediate steps that they want to take. So we're thinking that the next few months would help in that regard. The third one is still on the issue of financing, basically looking at the investment needs, the financing gap, and building a sustainable financing strategy around that. There's a paper that we had been circulated prior to the HLM. That paper still remains useful. It's now been translated into French and Spanish, and we'll still be happy to have conversations on that, including also on the use of the costing tool. So this is the first block of area in terms of the sector dialogue on the SDGs. The second block of suggestions is around the Inter-Ministerial Dialogues. And here we think that ongoing engagement with all relevant ministries is important to ensure that these ministers continue to provide their political support to these issues. And so we suggest that sector ministers who attended the meeting, as well as finance ministers who attended the meeting, could do a debriefing at country level. But we're also hoping that countries could develop a way of constantly engaging the finance minister. This could be through one-to-one meetings between the sector ministers and finance ministers, but it could also be through inviting the finance ministers or colleagues to some of the sector activities, including, for example, the joint sector reviews. But a very key process would be to engage around the budgeting process and use that information that came from the preparations of the meeting to develop this work to ensure that this work feeds into the budgeting process, and also the medium-term expenditure framework where that applies. And we suggest, and we've seen this happen in a few countries, that potentially having a finance and sector minister meet in a way that they discuss the financing issues, but perhaps also have some high-level activity around that could be useful as well. So in terms of the third area of action, which is about advocacy, we think that joint advocacy efforts can be very helpful to create high-level awareness on the key sector issues. Could be about the SDG baseline and the vision, about the building blocks and the collaborative behaviors, or indeed about the financing. And that key decision makers can be involved so that they could help to catalyze progress. And some of the examples of activities that could be done in the area of joint advocacy could be a brief report of the meetings, but also some of the things that are very key for the country, and maybe putting that information in the in-person face-to-face meetings, but also in perhaps what could be seen as a country-level type of high-level meeting, which involves these two ministers, which involve the key ministers from various ministries. There are strategic opportunities that are coming up ahead, the Global Handwashing Day, the World Toilet Day, and the fact that in July 2018, the UN High-Level Political Forum will focus on SDG 6, and so countries could already volunteer, could be thinking of volunteering to use to bring their perspectives on the SDGs to the UN High-Level Political Forum in July 2018 as a way of continuing with the advocacy at country level. So that was in terms of those three blocks of work. But in terms of tools, we've got the costing tool that was used by some countries, and if your country did not finalize that process and you're keen to do so, please let us know. The SWA collaborative behavior country profiles were shared, and those that we've received recently have been sent to various countries. The idea is that these could contribute to discussions on an ongoing basis, and hopefully lead to action on what can be done both from the side of government and partners to improve the application of the collaborative behaviors. I talked about the discussion paper. That paper is still available for use. And then from the secretariat, we'll be continuing with these webinars. Now we've done the first one after the meeting. We'll be having another one in June, and I'll show you a slide after this one on the remaining ones going up towards the end of the year. And we're keen also to share country experiences on could be SDG planning, could be on the building blocks or collaborative behaviors. So if there are country experiences that you would like to hear from other countries, maybe if the minister came back saying they were in a ministerial dialogue where they had something interesting from another country, would be happy to pick up that and see if we can create a link with that country that the minister is interested in terms of facilitating this ongoing discussion. The webinars that I talked about, these are so here's a schedule that we've planned going up to November. We've done this one now, and the next one is planned to be at the end of June, focusing on plans for achieving the SDGs. So we're hoping at that point we could showcase, or rather have countries that could talk about how far they've gone in their planning for the SDGs, and see if there are insights that countries want to hear from each other on that topic. Then in July, we want to focus on strengthening country monitoring and review systems for the SDGs. This would be centered around, for example, joint sector reviews or other activities that are focused on improving the review systems for the SDGs, and particularly in the use of evidence in decision making. In August, that will be a free month. Then we come back in September with a more focus on financing of the SDGs. This is across the board, all these 4 subsectors. And then in October, we want to focus more on sanitation, because in the planning, in the run-up to the HLM, to the high-level meeting, we saw and heard how this issue of financing sanitation remains a very pertinent issue, a very a big concern. So we want to have a webinar dedicated to that. Towards the end of the year in November, we'll focus more on country processes and picking up a lot of lessons from there as well to share. So this is the timeline, the forecast going up to November. And one thing to mention before we sort of open for questions is that we are really keen, especially in context where the minister has changed, a new minister has been appointed. Please let us know. We're keen to get the leadership of SWA to communicate with the political leaders in the country, to introduce SWA, to congratulate them on their appointment, but also just bring to their attention some of these recent discussions that have happened within SWA. And if that is helpful to your cause, please do not hesitate to let us know. We will make sure that we get that to happen. So that's also another thing that we're intending to continue to do in the coming months. For now, these are the ideas that we have, but we know that there have been a lot of conversations in different countries, so we're happy to pick to hear any of those ideas as well, so that in case there are 1 or 2 other things that other countries want to pick, they can do so. So at this point, let me pause and ask if there are any questions that colleagues have, and then once we pass through this first phase of questions, we'll open up for country experiences, starting with Sri Lanka and then other countries as well. So let me just pause to see if there are any questions, and if somebody would like to pick up the floor to ask their question, please feel free. Okay, so I think we've got comments. We've got issues that have come up through the chat. Interesting conversations, it seems. So from Pakistan, that there was a debriefing meeting there with the Pakistan sector minister and the representative of UNICEF as well. So I'm just skimming through to see if there is a particular question, but it looks like these are interesting ideas of what has already gone on in country. Okay, so it looks like most of these are really just a conversation about what else could be done, or how events are happening in different countries. So I will not go through them in terms of reading them out loud, as I hope most of you can already see these conversations. At this point, may I check with colleagues in Sri Lanka if they're still on the line, for them to offer us some of their ideas about what they're planning to do in the follow-up. So Ananda and Ms. Mangalika, the floor is open, and I have unmuted your mic, so if you could pick it up. Ananda, are you able to hear me? Okay, it looks like we do not have luck with that line. So at this point, may I just ask, I mean, Cameron, you've shared with us some of the ideas. Oh, okay, Ananda, we've got you now.
Yeah.
Okay,
right
please.
now. Yeah, in fact, as I told you last week, the minister was very happy about the proceedings, and he said it was aspirational throughout the 2 days, and it was very much interested in the statements by the chair to entice the finance ministers to get. There was an interruption.
Is it
Sorry.
okay, Sitali?
No, yes, we can hear you. We can hear you very loud and clear.
Yeah, that's right. So I think you have already compiled the meeting speeches and things like that, so that we can have a meeting very soon with the minister to brief on to present the outcome of the high-level meeting. Outcome means the material. Yeah, on the SDG process. Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Yeah, on the SDG process, that we have already discussed with the key agencies in Sri Lanka, and ministry is now taking the leadership to have a consultation. Most probably on the 13th of this month, next month, we are going to have a national, say, readiness to find out the readiness of the agencies on progressing towards SDG.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Ananda, for that insight in terms of what's going on in Sri Lanka on the thinking going forward. So that's a very helpful insight. Let me just check if there's anybody who would like you to probe further on any of the things.
Hello, I am Mangalika from Sri Lanka.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Actually, now, as we discussed in the last time, I think now we are preparing the baseline for the SDG 6 for Sri Lanka. Then I think at that time you agreed to assist us. How can we get that assistance to have this baseline for SDG 6? Because our interest is for the SDG 6, 1 and 2, because it is coming under our sector. That means water supply and sanitation.
Yes. Okay, so thank you for that, and I think we can also follow up with our colleagues at the JMP who had some preliminary information on that would have come to central statistical offices or so. So we'll check with them and then offer you some of their feedback and potentially also connect you with them directly so that you could have that conversation. But that's the kind of thing that if you're interested in sort of taking forward, we'll be happy to facilitate the conversation to happen with the right people. So we've taken note of that, and then we'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you, Siradi.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other experiences on the call, or ideas, or even questions about something that you might be thinking of doing but perhaps are not very sure, and maybe there would be other people on the call as well who've done a similar thing in the past, so that might help in getting ideas across the board?
Yeah, we have to discuss on the costing tools that we can do it some other time, I think. we can have one-to-one meeting.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think we can
Yeah.
talk about that in a bilateral call. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I'm just checking now with other colleagues on the phone, other countries that might want to share some of their ideas. Engineer Gulam, I think I had seen you were typing something. So if you wanted to offer any direct remarks on the phone, that would be right. That would be okay. Kitka, you're typing. If you want to pick up the mic straight, please just do that.
Okay, thank you, Sitali. And just say that to keep up the momentum of the SWA high-level processes in the country, we sought audience with the sector minister and our representative. We handed over the outcomes of the high-level meeting to him and also sought from him what he thought were key takeaway points for him from that high-level meeting. And as Kamran mentioned in the chat box, the issue of financing for the sector was one that stood out for him, and he requested his team to undertake a detailed analysis of the budgets that are just being finalized for announcement in June, so that then he could use that to look at how the provinces who have the mandate for the provision of these services could really focus on financing the sector better. And of course, the bottom line is about making of the efficient use of the resources we have, and not just, as we agreed during the HLM, going around with the ball asking for more money, but making sure we use what we have more efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kitka. And we were just speaking earlier today with the team from Nigeria, and they were saying that they too want to sort of go to their states and get those states to do their own budgeting first, and then they could utilize that at the national level. So I think at some point we might be coming to Pakistan, because I think that was done for the provinces, and like you're saying, sort of that's where the traction is. So I think it could be possible that Nigeria might be interested in some of your experiences there at the provincial level for their state level. I mean, sort of these federal systems could have some areas of insights to share. So thank you for that. Do we have any other colleagues that would love to share their feedback from the meeting, but also where they see the road going from here?
Hi, Sitali.
Hi, Therese. Please go on.
Yeah, sorry. It's more in the road going forward, so that we can figure how we can build. Because I noticed that the next webinar is on the country level plans for SDGs, and with our colleagues in IAPRO and particularly WHO, we had 19 countries, 5 government representatives from each country, so from the different ministries involved in water and sanitation, both urban and rural, the central statistics offices, and we had a 3-day working session on planning for the SDGs for 6.1, 6.2, also 6.3, 6A and 6B. So there was a lot of discussion, a lot of understanding of basic plus, safely managed, whatever it was. And at the moment, the countries are now, there was an overall template developed, and the countries are finalizing that, which is basically around setting their own country targets. Because as you know, we've gone through the country profiles, countries have agreed on their baselines, so now setting the plans moving forward. For South Asia, I know that Sri Lanka, government of Sri Lanka and government of, I'll think of which other one now. Anyway, 2 of the governments, Sri Lanka and not Nepal, but sorry. Anyway, I'll remember. They've already submitted their drafts, and I think the others are due in sort of in the next. The deadline is sort of the end of this month, so today or by the end of the week. So I think as we move forward, what will be really, really important is to see how we can build on these and figure out what's already done, what's already out there. Because, for example, government of Bangladesh, sorry, that's the other country who submitted. They're hosting a high-level meeting on the SDGs in July, where countries will be presenting these plans. So I think, how do we link in what's planned or what SWA is planning, or how we feed into your webinar the next time, so that it's all part of the same process? I guess that's the point I'd like to make.
Okay, thank you. That's really insightful, and it helps us a lot to know that at least 19 countries have actually even done some further exercises, and so that helps us also to be better informed when we're speaking with other regions and other countries. So I think we'll definitely come back to you, and also our colleagues in Bangladesh who might be organizing the next the meeting that you referred to, just so we can see if we can use some of the insights that they have for the webinar that we're planning, and like you said, to stagger these very well so that they contribute to each other as one, as several pieces of the same chain. So I think we'll pick up that. And you've mentioned also that you had colleagues from Sri Lanka at that meeting. So I think we can try and establish a connection with Ms. Mangalika and Ananda, and I'm not sure whether they are with the government colleague who was also on the call last weekend, who came to the HLM, because then that could help to build further discussions at country level on what has already been discussed. But thank you so much, Therese, for that.
Hi, Sitali. This is Lalit.
Yes, Lalit. How are you?
Sorry, I just late joined right now, and I just want to say from the Vietnam side that after this participation in SWA, I think there has been quite a positive development in the government side. Particularly, the vice ministers have been very, very active on the sanitation side, and he thinks that that's an important area to invest on. That's one thing. And as you probably know, that we, as UNICEF, functioned as an honest broker to mobilize $200 million from World Bank for the 21, that is 1/3 of the Vietnam's provinces, 21 underdeveloped provinces, for water and sanitation both. And the entire project design has been done in a way that it meets to the SDG definitions, so which is a very positive thing. Right now the situation is like this. The government is serious to develop on a ODF national plan. 30 provinces out of 63 provinces have drafted ODF plans and submitted to the national level and UNICEF to review. So we are currently reviewing those plans and exploring the possibility to come up with a national plan. Chandar is very much involved in this whole process, and Chandar is also helping us to be, part of the ODF evaluation, because we have established only 500 villages on ODF, but we are just trying to evaluate whether the sustainability of ODF is really going to be there or not, and what kind of social norms we need to establish or provide input to the government, including the provinces, to see how they can manage that sustainability aspect. So yeah, I think a lot of work is going on, but we have not scheduled as such any meeting this year on SDG planning for WAS, but probably that's the good point, and I will discuss with the ministry and see that if such a possibility is there. The problem with me is that we are still developing the after the CPD was approved, we are still developing the 5-year agreement with the different ministries, including Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Health, to establish the kind of cooperation that is probably not existing in every country like that, but that's the way Vietnam goes, and that is taking time. And I'm hopeful that that kind of cooperation will develop by end July, And if that happens, and we'll see like how best we can explore further. But what we'll do, we'll develop some milestone work like ODF to national plan, provincial plans. Then we are working on the strengthening operation maintenance management of water supply systems, water quality management systems for the water side. So that will be basically my milestone plans for working towards the SDG part. Okay, we'll look forward to the next one also, and I'll talk to you bilaterally on this. So I'll try to explore these PowerPoints and all later. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Lalit. Those are great insights as well in terms of the approach, also sort of looking at ODF targets and how to close that, and then building that sort of into sort of national plans. I think that's another angle to also looking at sort of the ladder approach. So we're keen to have that conversation, and if there are ways in which we could help contribute to that, we would be more than happy to bring any insights that we have. That's very helpful. So I saw that we had Bishnu, I think he was typing. So I just want to check if we have any further insights or any further comments or questions from anybody on the call. Please do feel free, because we'll be trying to bring this to a close in about 5 minutes. So if you have any additional thoughts, please let us know. Okay, I see. So just to say that in case there are people who are planning to leave at this moment, and if you have not given us the name and where you're joining from, please do that before you leave. If you could type that in the chat, that would be very helpful. And at this point, I'll just do a very quick recap of what we've sort of gone through very quickly, because I see some of the colleagues have just joined. So we've just gone through the summary of the 2 meetings that took place last month. Amanda gave us a rundown of the total numbers of ministers that we had, about 60 ministers, 60 participants at ministerial level. And then we looked also at the focus of those meetings, which were some discussions in plenary, and also 3 ministerial dialogues looking at sanitation, looking at financing, and preparedness, or maintaining progress in the face of risks, particularly climate change and other humanitarian disasters. And then we've also looked at the finance ministers meeting in terms of its focus on getting clear the messages on the fact that the challenge that we have to finance the SDGs is significant, but that closing that financing gap needed a better use of existing resources, as well as attracting additional financing. And then we've shared some of the ideas for follow-up. One, looking at the continuing this sector dialogue on the SDGs, the baseline and the vision, as well as the sector preparedness in terms of building blocks and collaborative behaviors. And then we've also looked at suggestions about the Inter-Ministerial Dialogues, which we think that would be useful to keep the momentum at that high political level, and then some advocacy ideas as well. In terms of the conversations, I think hearing from Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Vietnam, and also from Therese about these 19 countries that have already sort of started doing some work on SDG planning has been very insightful. I hope I haven't forgotten. I think, oh yes, Bishnu from Lao as well shared some ideas there. So that was good. Our colleague Engineer Ghulam in Afghanistan has not had a very good connection line. Yeah, Engineer Ghulam, if your line is clear now, you could make the intervention. But if it's not clear at this point, we perhaps could try and have a telephone conversation, say next week or so, or when you're free. Should we just try now and see if you want to see if your connection is better now, Engineer Ghulam?
Yes, Sitali, this is Qadir. Am I clear?
We can hear you loud and clear. Oh, the line has just dropped. So I think we can follow up with Engineer Gulam later, but at this point I wanted to bring it back to Amanda, just so she could offer some of her final thoughts, and then we should be bringing this to a close. Please, if you have not put your name on the chat, please do so, and if you are with people on the call with you, please remember to let us know as well who else you are with. Amanda, over to you.
So thank you, Sitali. I will be very quick. I think a number of people have had to leave already. Again, just to repeat the thanks to everyone for their engagement, both in the lead up to the meeting and now in the follow-up. I think that some of the comments that we've heard are extremely encouraging, the fact that there is follow-up in many countries. And I do take on board very much the feedback that we're hearing that a lot is happening in countries, a lot has already happened in many countries. I think Teresa's example from her region was a strong one. And so part of what we do within the partnership is take stock of where everyone's at. And countries are at very different levels. And I think it's helpful for us to be able to have an insight into where different countries are in their planning, etc. So again, really just thanks to everyone for the continued engagement. And Sitali, thanks for your both organising and sharing of the webinar.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you, everyone. For our colleagues in countries, if you would like us to do a bilateral call, we're happy to do that. If there's any question about the building blocks or anything else, please let us know. We'll be happy to have a bilateral conversation on that. Thank you very much, and I'll follow up with Engineer Gulam, whose line dropped out, to see if we can do a bilateral at some point. And do have a good day, and hope to speak to you very soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hello.
Hello, Ananda, are you still there?
I didn't hear anything from you. That's why.
Oh, okay. So we just finished the call, and we're just appreciating everyone for their input. And I was also just checking with Engineer Gulam if you're still there from Afghanistan. Engineer Gulam, we could use this time if you're free to have the bilateral. Let us know.
Yes, Italy, I'm available, and it's okay with me if you're going to continue.
Okay. Okay, that's it. No, that's fine. So I think I'll just ask Balvant to remain on the line for this part of the conversation.
Yes,
and Balvant, you're still there, right?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
So we're transitioning this into the bilateral call with Afghanistan. And we did a similar process earlier in the day, so it's helpful because it just takes us we don't have to re-establish the call. So Engineer Gulam, thank you again for trying to get back into the call. When we realized that we had lost you, we just continued with the discussion to get to a close. But there are two things that we thought we could check with you in a bilateral discussion. One is to hear back any feedback that you have on the meetings last month. So if there's something that you think we could have done differently in the preparations for that meeting, as well as in the meeting itself, would be happy to take note of that feedback. And then the second one was just to discuss in a bilateral fashion with you in terms of the plans or ideas for follow-up. And if you think there's a way in which we can contribute to that or support that process, we'll be happy to take note and find out ways of supporting that. So these are sort of two objectives that we had in mind. But happy to also follow your lead if you think there's something else that we should include in the conversation.
Sitali, are you hearing me? Do you hear me
Yes,
now?
I can hear you.
Sitali, I'm so sorry. I think the connection is not good here. If I'm going to disconnect it again, maybe we need to have a mobile dialing call directly. So, but I just wanted to brief you what happened after the HLM meeting in Afghanistan. So, once we were back, unfortunately, we did not have any minister in the HLM, but I was the one to share the situation from Afghanistan side. Once we were here, the good thing is that the government is actually leading on the SDGs, and the Ministry of Planning, the minister himself is chairing the group of the ministers on the progress and the planning and preparation. But then there is another forum of the deputy ministers and the directors at the technical level where we are also part of that. One thing that in Afghanistan we were not very clear was the SDG indicators. So we had a one-day workshop with the whole partners, with the civil society organizations, the government, the UN agencies, and fortunately we were able to at least set up the indicators for Afghanistan. So that was presented to the Ministry of Economy and Planning to be shared with the UN Permanent Mission. And however, you know, we don't have very precise statistics, but all these indicators were discussed and consulted, and it was just on the basis of the activities and achievements that has been done so far in the WASH sector, both in urban and rural Afghanistan. We were just able to finalize that and share with the Ministry of Planning. The second step is now, as you also talked about, you know, how those indicators and objectives could be met. So we are working, we're planning to work on the planning. We're planning to work on the financing, of course. In terms of the planning and financing, hello, are you hearing me, Stali?
Yes, still very much here.
Yeah. On the planning and investment, as I also shared during our presentation in the HLM, that our country is almost totally dependent on the international aids. So we've just been able to forecast the investment needed to reach to the MDG, to the SDG goals and targets. But the government has, you know, the national development program of priority on the WASH under the Citizens Charter. So out of, from that national priority program, we are actually planning to increase, you know, the coverage from the current, coverage of 58 to 76% in the rural areas, and in the case of drinking water. But in the case of sanitation, we are also planning to increase the coverage from 25 to 36%. But looking to the SDG, you know, indicators, once we are talking about, you know, the safely managed and, you know, the universal access. The access to drinking water in the case of safely managed comes down to 10%, and sanitation up to almost 1%. So it means that we have a long way to go to the SDGs, but the thing is that we are committed to do. So that's why Afghanistan, which is, a war and disaster-prone country, needs a lot of, SWA engagements to at the country level to, convince the political leaders, and also at the international level to convince the donors and the development, banks to invest in the sector. So for us, what we need to prepare is to have, the investment strategy, the policies, and the building blocks, as you say, for the sector. So this is what I just wanted to share. But I'm sure we're also attending the steering committee meetings in Budapest. So I'm sure a lot of discussion will also take place there. Any specific questions or updates you want from our side to explain now? You're most welcome.
Okay. No, thank you so much for that. It was really insightful to hear of the efforts and the work that's already gone in. And I think the Citizens Charter is always something that comes up as a very interesting and innovative plan. So I think because as I understand, to a great extent, the Citizens Charter is aligned to the SDGs, right? Is that understanding correct?
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, so I think maybe that's one other way we could also showcase Afghanistan's work in the webinar next month. So then you could talk about the Citizens Charter, how the planning went around that, but also how it integrates the SDGs. But you've also said that when you look at the ladder now of the SDGs, some of those numbers on safely managed come down. So what does that mean for the Citizens Charter? Does that mean a part of it needs to be worked on, or the Citizens Charter is put in such a way that it's aspirational, and then you can always sort of have these sector standalone sort of plans that feed into it that are a bit more specific? So I think that's something that we can look at as we get into the course of next month. But it sounds like an interesting sort of area where perhaps we can work with our colleagues in comms maybe to document this case and have it shared a bit more, but also shared within sort of that webinar context. I think what would be interesting also is just to see if you've got specific things that you want to hear from other countries on this planning spectrum for the SDGs. What would those questions be, so that this when we feature Afghanistan on that webinar,